Right, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, apparently totally out of touch with the realities of the world we're living in right now and is blocking extra spending on defence, which many experts are saying we need not in 2030s, not in the next 5 years, but now. Well, Sean Bell is a military and defence analyst and joins us now to talk about that. Good morning to you, Sean.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. So we're told that it's the Chancellor blocking this. The reality is, if the Prime Minister wanted the money to be spent, it would be spent. But we are talking about what sort of sums of money here?
Well, we're talking about significant sums of money, and it's worth setting some context here, Julia. There was a strategic defence review after the government came into power, did a defence review that created a vision for what defence needed. That was published in the summer of last year. Now, vision without funding is hallucination, so you need to have some funding mapped behind that. The Defence Investment Plan was therefore meant to be produced in the end of autumn last year. We still haven't seen it, and we do understand now there's a lot of fighting going on because, bluntly, there's very little money. It's all about choices, and I think whilst the Keir Starmer's been making big announcements on the world stage, Rachel Reeves is turning around and saying, where's the money going to come from?
Which is a fair question, because at the end of the day, we can't borrow anymore. We're going to probably have to put tax up or cut spending somewhere else. And neither of those is politically very comfortable. But the reality is not spending the money is also going to be a lot more uncomfortable for us, isn't it? Because something's been very clear, all these, the Munich Security Conference, all the meetings of defence chiefs, the G7 meeting, again and again, it is really, really clear that Europe is going to have to stand on its own a lot more in terms of defence. And we're going to have to start spending the sort of serious money that America's been spending for years.
I think you're absolutely right, Julia. I mean, in the Cold War, I started my military career in the Cold War. We were spending over 4% of our GDP on defence. That's gradually drifted to 2%. We've sort of relied on NATO, particularly relied on America, where they've continued to keep their spending. Now we've got this ridiculous situation. America spends more money than the rest of NATO put together, and we've largely been living under their security umbrella. And they've turned around and gone, hang on a minute, we're not happy with that anymore. NATO needs to become more European. You need to step on your own 2 feet. Now, I accept that there's a big challenge around money, but there's a lovely quote, isn't there? The failing to prepare means you're preparing to fail. Yeah. And the challenge here is, if you're going to spend more money on defence, do what the government said and actually make defence the foundation of growth for this country. It's not just this country, the whole world is going to be spending more money on defence. We've got some fantastic industries. We could leverage that. And of course, the flip side, if we fail to do that, if we don't have the ships, tanks, aeroplanes, missiles and support, if we are attacked, we end up in the position that Ukraine was in, where suddenly they have to put mass conscript armies, massive wars of attrition, a huge number of casualties. That is not something anybody wants to see. It's the number one priority. We need to step up and get on with it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, people will say there's warmongering. No, you have the military so that you don't have to go to war. So you will be taken seriously by our adversaries who are absolutely spending their money on that. And this is one of the big worries. We just talk about Ukraine, because if there were a ceasefire in Ukraine, if Russian resources were not tied up in Ukraine in the way they have been, the reality is, there's a very big risk that Vladimir Putin, whose economy and whose presidency is now completely reliant on war, basically a war machine, that he would turn his attentions elsewhere. Pretty sure in the knowledge that there isn't unanimity in NATO anymore, and that there could be a serious question mark about whether NATO as a whole would, agree to abide by the idea that attack on all one is an attack on all, and would go to the aid of the Latvias, the Lithuanians and Estonians. And I would seriously worry about that myself. We need to be able to protect ourselves and our neighbours. What do you make of where we are, though, with Ukraine? Because more peace talks. Apparently they ended with acrimony after just 2 hours this morning. And once again, the Ukrainian President Zelensky basically accusing Moscow of trying to drag out negotiations that could already be entering their final stage, because the Russians ain't moved at all, have they? And the Americans are still calling on the Ukrainians to give up territory that Russia hasn't even been able to conquer militarily.
Yeah, I mean, the talks is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I've been commenting on this war for the last 4 years, and it's a horrible period of time. The harsh reality is talks only happen when both sides are genuinely interested in talking. Yeah. What's pretty clear is President Zelensky is having a lot of pressure put upon him by the US president to capitulate, to effectively surrender. And the only reason it seems to me that those talks are happening is that Ukraine genuinely feels there may be the prospect of a peace, whereas Russia simply wants to see how far America is prepared prepared to push, because if it can achieve its objectives without fighting, but simply relying on American pressure. And I think what's telling is that I understand it's not been publicised, but I do understand from colleagues that actually the Brits and the French actually barged into that meeting at one stage and actually said, America, it's not just down to you. There are European security implications here that might well explain why some of it collapsed at the end.
I think it's probably a good thing that it has collapsed, because any deal, I mean, again, constitutionally, you know, the handing over of territory to Russia, as one of their military chiefs and negotiators pointed out, we may as well have just done that in the first 6 weeks of the war 4 years ago. If we were going to do that, what was the point of fighting all this time?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've visited Ukraine a few times, and they're very, very clear. I didn't see any appetite for them for giving up or stopping. I do accept that as a military guy, you know, you've got to find a negotiated end to this. Yeah. But it's pretty clear historically, Russia will need to be forced to capitulate. Exactly. There are lots of ways that Europe could step up to make life more and more difficult. The economy is hurting. By all accounts, the last couple of months, they've actually been losing far more people on the battlefield than they can recruit. And thirdly, there's reports over the last 2 weeks of Ukraine actually making some advances of their own. So the war isn't over, but actually we've got to step up as Europe and recognise that if Ukraine was to fall, frankly, European security is compromised. That is far more important, particularly given Donald Trump's attention seems to be far more focused on the West, China on the East. Russia's war now is a fight for Middle Earth. It's existential for us.
Sean Bell, thank you so much. Military defence analyst Sean Bell there. Thank you. Claire Pissell, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a really, really sensible argument there that we need to look at the fact that Russia aren't even beginning to talk about this. They've never been interested. Ukraine is...
They're taking the mick.
Of course they are. And who's going to pull them up on it? Because it's certainly not our Prime Minister.
Yeah, we're not able to if we haven't got the military. What amazes me is, you know, not spending money on stuff which takes, you know, 5 years to build. By the way, during Second World War, it didn't take us 5 years to build tanks and fighter jets. We are going to have to up our, you know, our game. But you know what would really help if we had cheap, affordable energy and had a manufacturing industry base still.
Do you think?
Mad idea, people. Might catch on. So much